going on, everybody? This is Cody, the home theater hobbyist, and today I want to talk to you about the flagship DAC from Topping. This is the D90SE, and as far as I know, SE probably stands for Special Edition, but I could be wrong. Now, a DAC is a digital to analog converter, which means it takes a digital sound source from something like, let's say, a computer or a CD player, something like that, and it converts it to analog, so it can be sent onto an amplifier so you can hear it over a pair of headphones or a pair of speakers. Now, this doesn't have any amplifiers built in. It's got a preamp, but it doesn't have any amplifiers built in. You will need something like this headphone amplifier I have back here. This is the Topping A90, and it's actually the headphone amplifier that they suggest you pair with this DAC, and I'll talk about how they sound together in a moment. But you can also pair this with a traditional power amplifier. I actually did try this with my Monoprice Monolith 7-channel amplifier to power 2 speakers, because this is a stereo DAC and it works well. And I'll talk about that again in a minute as well. But they did have a previous version of this, the D90, and it used an AKM chip. But as many of you know, AKM had a horrendous factory fire, I want to say late 2020. And it was so bad that it literally took them 3 days to put the fire out. So Topping had to pivot to another manufacturer, and they chose ESS. And this has the ES9038Pro chip in it. The top of the line DAC chip is actually an 8-channel chip, and they're using all 8 channels. They're doing the current to voltage conversion, or IV, from each one of the channels and running that in parallel to the outputs on this DAC. And I believe that's one of the things that gives this a really, really low noise floor. The THD plus in measurement is really good on this DAC. And what that means for us as listeners is you don't get as much noise coming off the DAC as you would. It should be inaudible. So the noise from, let's say, the power supply or the electronics inside shouldn't be audible in the signal that it sends to the amplifier. And I have to say that I didn't hear any noise coming from that when I was listening to this particular DAC. Another feature that it has in it, and I mentioned this earlier, was you can pair this with a traditional 2-channel stereo amplifier, or even multi-channel. You'll only be able to plug in 2 channels, but you can do 2-channel with this DAC as well, because inside the menu system, you can change the output voltage. You can go from 4 volts to 5 volts, and so you'll get that voltage that you need to send over to a traditional bigger stereo amplifier. Now, as you can see, I have it here in black, but it also comes in silver, and I have to give a shout out to Apos Audio because they sent me this particular DAC for review. So thank you, Apos. If you want to purchase anything for your headphone setup, definitely use those links in the description below to find out more about what Apos has to offer. As I said, this is the black version that I have here, and on the front face, it's got 3 buttons along with the LCD screen in the middle. It's a traditional black and white LCD screen, and it gives you information like input selection, what frequency it is playing at, what format it's playing in, that sort of thing. I wish it were color, but you know, it works. It has the ability, or you can go in and change the brightness on the LCD screen if you want to, so that's really cool. On the far left, you've got the main power button and just overall mode button, because you can do things like menu selection and stuff like that. And then over here, you've got an up-down arrow, so you can go up and down in the menu system and also change the volume when this is in preamp mode. Now over here, it does come with the remote, and this remote works. It's not my favorite remote, to be honest with you. It does do power on, off, mute, you know, change the volume if you're in preamp mode, that sort of thing. But it's not backlit, and honestly, some of the buttons on here don't even work for this particular DAC. It actually says in the menu, invalid, but you can go in here and change the filter mode on the PCM output if you want to do that and other things. So it's not the best remote in the world, but it does work and it does fit in the hands. It's plastic, it's fine, right? Okay, along the rear are all the connections. On the right-hand side of the chassis are the inputs, and on the left-hand side are the outputs. There are 2 XLR and RCA outputs on this side of the chassis, and this is where you're going to connect your amplifier. Now, the good news is you can actually run both of these simultaneously in the menu system if you want to, but you can also just do XLR only or RCA only if you want to, so that's good. Next to that is the I2S or I2S connection, which basically is like an HDMI connection there. And then there's a coaxial connection right there, along with an optical. There's also a Bluetooth antenna because this does do Bluetooth 5, and it supports all major forms of Bluetooth, including aptX, aptX HD, SBC, LDAC, and many others. Now just below that is the USB connection, so you can connect this to your computer. And there's also an AES connection here. So if you're in a professional studio and need an AES connection, this has it as well. Moving over to the right, it also has the power connection here and the main power switch. Now this DAC does support the MQA format. It is a full decoder, so it can do the first, second, and final unfold of the MQA format, and it does it across all the major inputs, including the coax, optical, USB, and AES. And so that's another great thing about this DAC. Now let's move on and talk about my experience. I've got the D90SE on top and the Topping A90 headphone amplifier on the bottom. And I'm just gonna say they sound fantastic together, but I'll get into that a little bit more in a moment. I use a pair of Beyerdynamic DT770Pros as a pair of closed back headphones to test, and also the Hi-Fi Man Aria as a pair of open back headphones to test, along with the Hiko Aurora 1000 loudspeakers that I tested just to make sure that it would work with a bigger power amplifier. And I'm happy to say that it definitely works. Now, when I was testing this, I tested music, and I also even watched some like YouTube trailers, like the Maverick trailer, just to see how everything would sound. And I have to say, it sounds fantastic. Now, while I was doing my testing, my wife came in the room and she was asking me what I was doing. I was like, I'm just testing this headphone amplifier. I think it sounds good. And so I actually put some headphones on her, and she started listening to music, and she was like, wow, that sounds really, really good. And I was like, yeah, you can just hear the details. She was like, yeah, but I bet you can't hear it on this song. And so we spent about an hour and a half or so with her just sitting down, picking different songs that she didn't think it would do well with, and it did well with pretty much every song that we listened to. It has excellent detail, has excellent clarity, very low and pretty much no noise. I couldn't hear any noise in any of the tracks coming from the electronics in the box. And overall, I found that this has a nice sound stage. Everything is left or right like it's supposed to be. There's no bleed over between the channels, and things are placed where they're supposed to be placed. As I said, I watched the Top Gun Maverick trailer on YouTube, and there's planes flying over and things like that. And there was definitely height to the image, and it sounded like things were going overhead as much as it can in a pair of headphones. And it was really good. I really appreciated the way it just sounds so good with having everything placed where it's supposed to be placed. There's also nice depth to the image between, let's say, a lead vocalist and the surrounding band. When listening to live concerts, I also found that the audience sounds fantastic. When an audience is mic'd right, you can hear the details. You can hear not only the clapping, but the laughing and just all the different things, the shouting that people have. You can hear that detail with clarity with this DAC and with this overall setup. The sound profile of this DAC is neutral. I didn't hear any coloration, whether it be at the high end, mid-range, or in the bass. And speaking of bass, it plays bass nice and tight and punchy when it's supposed to be. But if you got a little bit more weighty bass where it's really down low, it plays that as well. It's a great experience in the bass department. I can say the same thing for the mid-range and the high end, the treble. All of it just sounds good, crisp, and clean. Now, when listening to a high-end DAC like this, one of the questions that a lot of people have, and I myself had, is, does it sound any better than DAC X? And so I wanted to answer that question. And so I started messing with my personal DAC that I have here. This is the Topping EX5, and it is similar to this in that it plays MQA, but it doesn't do some of the things that this does, and it doesn't have as high-end of an ESS chip in it as well. But I did listen to this and compare these two back to back, and I can say that the differences are there. This plays a little bit better, but they are definitely subtle. I spent actually probably about an hour and a half or so just messing around with these two to see if I could find the differences. And what I found was the D90SE plays just a little bit cleaner than, let's say, the EX5 will play. The notes are just a little bit more in their lane. Everything is just a little bit sharper, a little bit cleaner when you're listening to the D90SE, and that's a good thing. Is it mind-blowingly different? No, like I said, it took me like an hour and a half of just listening to things back and forth between these two DACs to really hear it, but it is there. So you are getting something for your money for this DAC. And that brings me on to the value portion of this. At $900, this is pretty expensive, but at the same time, it does everything well, including play with a bigger, more powerful amp, which I tried. And what I did was I put this into preamp mode because I needed volume control over my amplifier, and I set the output voltage to 5 volts, and it sounded clean, clear, and crisp like it's supposed to sound. It's a great DAC, even for a bigger sound system. And so in my mind, that actually adds to the value proposition of this particular amplifier. It's not for the faint at heart at $900, but I have to say that it definitely plays. It has all the tricks up its sleeves, all of the inputs. You can play it with your big system or headphone amplifier if you want to. And even the volume scale, I'll mention that as well. The volume scale is nice and linear. So as I was turning the volume up on this, it didn't all of a sudden increase, instead of 1 click, 5 clicks or something like that. It was not nice and linear. And as it changed formats, as I was changing songs and it changed formats, it was quick. It was easy to see which formats were actually changing. And it was just a great overall experience. And yes, this is a hardware unit, so a review unit. I'm gonna have to send it back, but I'm going to be sad to send it back because this thing does sound fantastic. Now, there are 3 things that I wish were a little bit different with this DAC. The first thing is the remote. I wish it was backlit. I wish the buttons were a little bit easier to define what they are, because I did have to go into the manual to figure out which buttons were which once I got down here. So I wish that was a little bit better. I also wish that the LCD screen was color and provided even more information about the tracks it's playing, maybe the track name or whatever. I wish they had that. And I wish it was easier to access the menu system, because to access it, what you have to do is make sure the main power button is off on the back. You push the front power button down, then you turn it on with the main power switch, and that shows you the menu selection. And you can go in and go up and down and make all your different selections. And I just wish that was a little bit easier to do, but otherwise this works well. And honestly, I highly recommend it because it plays detail for days. It's clean, it's clear, it's neutral. You can use it with a headphone amplifier or with your big system. It just works. And honestly, it's kind of what you want out of a flagship. It's a little bit expensive, but it has a lot of great features. Really low noise floor, great cyanide measurement, all of that's good with this DAC, so I have no problems recommending it. And honestly, my wife, if she were here, she would recommend it too. So if you want to purchase this or anything else, use those links in the description below. Also, if you enjoy this type of content, definitely leave us a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button and that notification bell so that we can know that you enjoy this content and continue making it. Thank you for watching. I'll talk to you next time.